After watching Sargon's live stream in regard to the ideas of Gynocentrism, I couldn't help but notice a certain degree of uncertainty of how the issue of unequal treatment of men and women under the law could be addressed in society, or even if they could be. To be clear, I do not subscribe to the idea that either nature or nurture as a determinant holds singular sway over individuals or society as a whole. I think it should be obvious, as a starting point at least, that both aspects have an impact on what makes us who we are. That said, I do think there are two things related that we can do to mitigate the most egregious aspects of hypergamy and gynocentrism. First, ask yourself, why are we in this particular time and place having the sort of discussions we are in regards to feminism, hypergamy, and so on? Your first instinct might be to say it's because technology has enabled us to do the discussion, but why weren't we having such an intense discourse on, say, Usenet used groups in the 90s or on radio in the 20s? The medium we're using isn't as important as the sort of environment we find ourselves in the current day. The reason I believe we're embroiled in the current sort of discussions we are is due to the economic environment that we find ourselves in. That is to say, scarcity, including relative, absolute, and imagined forms of it. Everyone attending Sargon's live stream seemed to be in agreement that humans have both biological influences as well as the ability to choose to ignore such impulses through acts of sheer will or agency. Neither denied the potential influence of the other aspect, but in my mind I see scarcity, both real and imagined, giving a greater influence to instinct and biology over individual choice and rationality. Choices with a very low potential to danger to our biological well-being are easier to make rationally than ones that put our basic survival at risk. In the most extreme cases, such as lifeboat scenarios, we can see how individuals can begin to see once repugnant actions becoming viewed as necessary or even justified. I would argue that we're in the midst of one of the greatest economic disturbances in human history. For the first time, economic cycles that were once localized to single countries or regions have become global in scope. Once the hard data is confronted about things like the amount of debts nations and people around the world are carrying, how wages are declining or failing to keep up, even those who are put in the position of putting a positive spin on the view of the economy for political purposes will in the end be forced to agree, at least privately, that things aren't what they once were in terms of the economy. Which brings us to MGTOW, feminism, hypergamy, and so on. Today's modern man is being squeezed out of his traditional role of provider for his family by the dual forces of a poor economy lowering his earning potential and the growing welfare state that seeks to replace men as providers, at least in the barest of terms. For instance, everyone seems to agree in general that there's at least a tendency for women to prefer men with resources over men with less resources or none at all. However, resources tend to have a diminishing return in terms of their effect on human happiness. So it could be reasonable to put forward the idea that the total amount of resources increases, you reach a point where more other aspects become more important than just obtaining more resources. For instance, let's say women are made to choose between a successful celebrity with millions of dollars and a working man who makes $50,000 a year. Since the working individual already overcomes most of the hurdles in terms of getting the sort of resources necessary to support a family, the biological imperative for additional resources is going to be much less than, say, a situation where the man earns a lot less. Once a certain threshold is reached, other factors would become more important, like knowing the person since childhood or other arbitrary traits would take more importance over each individual unit of additional resources a different male might provide. With this in mind, I can think of a few different implications that can help alleviate the worst aspects of hypergamy, leading to not only a better outcome for men, but everyone involved. One route would be to simply improve the economy, to make obtaining at least a sort of lifestyle where raising healthy children is easier to achieve. The rub here is that this cannot be achieved through political interventions or socialist handouts, or the process backfires. One pressure being placed on men is from the government welfare, replacing men as providers. Programs that simply throw money at people ultimately destroy the family dichotomy, even as it might keep its element members alive in a purely physical sense. They destroy both the aspects of men and women that compel them to act in virtuous ways. Without those fears of or challenges, individuals simply wither away. The other aspect we can change to help reduce the effects of hypergamy is simply to combat the unrealistically high expectations that have been historically set up through the culture of consumerism. To put it simply, the entrance into the industrial age and its accompanying huge economic growth could simply be a one-time event or a rare event in human history. Growth levels of the past and the expectations set by them may simply be unreasonable as we move forward into whatever the future holds for us economically, perhaps a zero growth situation, or worse, a collapse of sorts as we pay back for all the consumption we pulled forward with debt-fueled personal and government finances. The good news is this: raising a family and providing a decent home doesn't need to be nearly as expensive as we have made it out to be. Most of this is simply ideas put in our head by corporations that to be viewed as successful, we need a certain car or a certain home in a certain neighborhood, or to wear designer clothes, or to eat out at trendy ethnic restaurants 4 nights a week. Cultural movement aimed at uncovering unsustainable practices, the goal of which is to promote a less fake lifestyle in order to attract women would be called for. Men need to find their confidence not in flashy clothes or expensive cars or oversized homes, none of which they can really afford in most cases, and instead find their confidence through steady work, savings, lots of savings, and reasonable and necessary purchases that ultimately show you have what it takes to establish a home and raise a family, which are none of the sorts of things the media brainwashing make both men and women believe are necessary for a happy, healthy family life. In conclusion, I think realistically assessing what sort of resources are necessary to support a family and reprioritizing those resources for successful men while simultaneously destroying the cultural and economic environment that allowed for unsustainable debt practices to lead women astray with visions of unrealistic to maintain lifestyles, while also attacking the generational welfare lifestyle, we can widen the range of economic outcomes where stable families are formed. Debt and welfare are the two biggest factors that squeeze men out of the range of economic outcomes that would make them appeal to women to form a family. Too much welfare, and men aren't necessary. Too much easy debt, and you have to be willing to mortgage everything just to appear like you're keeping up with the Joneses. I hope these practical goals might provide at least some idea of how some real progress can be made moving forward. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you again next time.